Hello and welcome to the Visual Studio 2010 Load Testing webinar. My name is Ian Holdsworth and I am a consultant with Test House, the independent software testing specialists. We are an award-winning software testing consultancy and also a Microsoft partner with offices in London, Madrid, Kerala, as well as the United States, Dubai and Saudi Arabia. We offer test guidance and process improvement as well as test management, manual and automated testing, application lifecycle management support from Agile all the way to CMMI. We support both functional and non-functional testing such as load testing and are dedicated to process improvement using Visual Studio 2010 and Team Foundation Server. Here we have a subset of our clients in the Middle East. Microsoft Visual Studio 2010 is a multifaceted development platform comprising not only support for Microsoft Team Foundation Server, but also Microsoft Test Manager, lab management, unit testing, performance and load testing, as well as many others. Over the next few months, Test House will be presenting a series of training sessions and webinars on many of these aspects. Today I am primarily going to be talking about load testing. Earlier this year, I presented a webinar on Microsoft performance testing. A link will be provided at the end of this webinar. It is important to understand that the main basic component of a Microsoft load test is a Microsoft web performance test, although unit tests and coded UI tests can also be used. Most load tests utilize web performance tests. There are numerous kinds of load tests, and it is important to understand each one. The simplest one is referred to simply as load testing, and is for the purpose of testing an application under its anticipated expected load in order to test that it performs as expected. Next up, we have stress testing. This is done to ascertain how much load an application is capable of taking to gain some idea of how robust the application is. Spike testing, aka capacity testing, is used to ascertain how well an application copes with sudden surges and drops in usage. Endurance testing involves running the test at the anticipated normal load over an extended period of time, periodically checking the memory and performance degradation. Configuration testing is running the test at normal load but trying it against different configurations to see which gives the best performance. And isolation testing is used in load testing to try and isolate a fault to a specific domain in an application. As stated earlier, Microsoft load tests can utilize three basic components: web performance tests, unit tests, and coded UI tests. Web performance tests simulate a web browser's interactions with a website or web service. Unit tests are normally used to call APIs, simulate client-server interactions, or call web services. Coded UI can be used to simulate an end user's interactions with an application's user interface. However, there is a drawback that each virtual user created by the load test will require either a physical or virtual PC to run on. So in order to generate any significant load, an awful lot of PCs, either physical or virtual, are required, plus they will need to be configured as test agents. When setting up a load test, first we decide on our scenario. Next, we select our load pattern. Then we select our test mix model, which can be based on the total number of tests, which is a simple, even distribution between tests, virtual users, which is just simply distributed equally between the virtual users. Based on user pace, the tests are then distributed through the duration of the test, and test order. The tests in this selection, the tests are performed sequentially per virtual user, who will cycle back to the first test at the end. Test mix allows you to specify what proportion of tests will receive what proportion of load. So essentially you can set one test at 25% and another test at 75%, saying that one test will receive 25% of the load and another test will receive 75%. Network mix, like test mix, allows you to apportion load to specific types of network. Browser mix, again, like test and network mix, allows you to proportion load out to specific browsers. It is important to be aware that some web servers respond differently to different browsers, which could have an impact on your load test. Counter sets allows you to select which performance monitor counters you want from each machine. Note that it is generally reserved that the web or application server and any associated machines, not to the machines in your test rig, which the counters are automatically collected. Test run settings allows you to set up the basic duration, iterations, etc. of a test run. Allow me to demonstrate. First, I'm going to load Visual Studio 2010. When Visual Studio 2010 has finished loading, I'm going to open my web test project. I'm going to go to the test menu and select New Test. I'm going to select Load Test, and I'm going to call it Demo Load Test, and leave Add to Web Test Project as my web test project. I'm now presented with the new Load Test Wizard, which starts with an information screen. I'll press Next. I'm now prompted for our primary scenario. I'm going to leave this as scenario 1. I'm going to leave the think time profile as use normal think times distributed, centered on the actual think times. And leave the other settings as they are. Moving on, now we're asked for our load pattern. I'm going to select step load. I'm going to set our initial users to 0, our duration to 5, our step user count to 2 and our maximum number of users to 50. This means that my load test will start with 0 users, and then every 5 seconds it will add 2 users until it reaches 50 users. This means that it should reach maximum load within 2 minutes 5 seconds. I'll press the next key. I'm now prompted for my test mix model. I'm going to leave it as the based on total number of tests and click next. Now we need to specify our test mix. As we only have one test, I will add it and set it at 100%. Moving on, network type lets us specify what kind of network we will simulate running over. Note that network traffic will be collared to the appropriate level. Also note that we can set up a mix of network types. So I could say add an international slow WAN at 300 kilobytes a second, and say that I want that to be 20%. I'll click next. Browser mix allows us to simulate different browsers. We have quite a selection to choose from. I'm just going to leave that at Internet Explorer 7 for now. Counter sets enable us to collect performance monitor counters from the machines under test, so that we can get IIS counters from the web server and SQL counters from the database server. I'll click next. Finally, run test settings enable us to set up our warm-up period, duration, iterations, amongst others. I'm going to set our duration to 2 minutes and 30 seconds. I'll now click finish. I'm now presented with our load test in the load test editor. You'll notice that it appears to be like the wizard, only arranged in a tree structure. So we have our test mix, our network mix, our browser mix, our step load pattern, all of which come under the scenario which we initially set up. Note that if we want to add another scenario, we simply need to right click and add scenario. It is important to understand that load will be distributed evenly between each scenario in a load test, but each scenario can have its own settings for how it apportions its share of the load. Beneath scenario we have counter sets. Note that the counter sets for our controller and agents have already been set. This section will also include counters for any of our web or application servers if we have specified any. Beneath counter sets we have run settings, which at the moment just contain our active run. However, we can have as many run settings as we like. Run settings allow us to configure the overall settings of a test run. It also contains our external machine settings if we have configured any. Okay, let's try running the test. Once our load test starts, we will be presented with a set of graphs. Key indicators, page response time, system under test, and controller and agents. These four graphs are accompanied by a key down below. Notice also on the left we have a tree structure containing all the available counters which we may wish to add. Also, if I right click on the keys and select plot options, I have options to change the colour, style and range. Also notice in the toolbar above I have options to show the overview panel, show the counters pane, reorganize how the graphs are presented, restore the default settings, add a new graph or remove a graph, change how the graphs are presented slightly, and add comments to the graph that is currently being run. If I move on to the tables section, we are presented with tables for pages, errors, requests, SQL trace will often come up, tests, test details will sometimes come up as well, thresholds and transactions. Note that it is relatively easy to copy an entire table and paste it into Excel. When the load test has finished running, we are presented with the summary report, which contains all the basic information about the load test, including test run information, overall results, test results, key statistics, test results, page results, transaction results, system under resources, controller and agents, and errors. When setting up a test rig, one area that often causes a lot of confusion is related to which security protocol is in place. You can have your test rig running in either a domain or a work group. Running a test rig under a domain is by far the simplest way of configuring your test rig, as you simply need to make sure that your agents are running as a user with the Team Test Agent Service privilege. Your test controller simply needs a user account, and your end user simply needs the Team Test Controller Users privilege, and possibly the Team Test Controller Admin's privilege if he is going to be administering the controller and agents. Running under a workgroup is more complicated. Your controller machine needs 3 accounts setting up: a control service account, a user ID and password matching the agent service account, and a user ID and password matching the end user account. Your agent machine also needs 3 accounts setting up: an agent service account, a user ID and password matching the controller service account, and a user ID and password matching the end user account. Your end user only needs the 1 account. Note that the agent service account on the agent machines will need the additional Team Test Agent Service privilege, and the end user account on the controller machine will need the Team Test Controller Users privilege, and possibly the Team Test Controller Admin's privilege. Note that these accounts will also need the perfmon privileges as well, and all the machines will need their firewalls configuring. Also note the configuration of the communication structure of the test rig. The end user submits the test to the controller, which then connects to the agents and runs the test on each agent. We also have included additional resources which include Ed Glass's content index for load tests and web performance tests, a downloadable virtual machine, the recording of my previous web test, and also the Microsoft Gulf Community Twitter account and the Test House UK Twitter account. Thank you for further information on upcoming training. Please visit our microsite www.th-ms.com. If you have any questions, please ask them now. And our first question: can load testing be done on an earlier version? Well, load testing can be done on versions 2008 and 2010 of Visual Studio. Visual Studio 2005 no longer supports it. However, that doesn't mean it won't work. It will not work on earlier versions of Visual Studio as far as I'm aware. Next question: can we download the presentations? Yes, a link will be forwarded at the end of the webinar. Next question: can we do a load test by just giving a URL? No, you need to record a web performance test. If I just quickly come back to our additional resources, here's the link to the web performance testing webinar that I did about 2 months ago. So you should be able to watch that, and that will show you how to do a web performance test. What should be the ideal configuration which we should have on a machine where this tool should be used? Well, for machines with less than 1000 virtual users, the 2.6 GHz processor with 2 gigs of RAM and 10 gigs of hard disk space. For more than 2000 users, 2.6 gigs of gigahertz processor, 2 gigs of RAM and 10 gigs of hard disk space. I believe we can do these tests on a SharePoint environment. Is 2007 supported? Yes, we could use this environment to test a SharePoint installation. However, you may need to install the Feature Pack 2 if Silverlight proves to be an issue. Also, you can certainly run certain tests from within SharePoint as long as they have been properly automated. Next question. Which versions of Visual Studio 2010? Well, as I've already stated, Visual Studio 2008 and Visual Studio 2010. Next question. How many virtual users? On a test agent, it is unlimited, although I don't recommend more than 2000 as a general rule per agent. However, it is worth noting that a local run is still limited to 250 users, and if you want to be able to take advantage of multiple processors on a test agent, you will need to use the extended user licenses. Thank you very much. If you want to contact us, here is our contact information. Thank you. Goodbye.